Hello everyone, I'm Michaela Kathleen, and in this video I'm doing my April reading wrap-up. I read 4 books in April and continued on with my journey with V.E. Schwab. I've been trying to read one V.E. Schwab book or series per year for the past few years. This started because my husband actually got really invested in V.E. Schwab without ever having read any of her books. He just saw the covers and really liked them and liked the premise for a lot of the books, and so in pretty quick succession he bought the entire Shades of Magic series, the Vicious duology, and the Near Witch without having read any of them. He has now read the entire Shades of Magic duology, Vicious, and 40 pages of Vengeful. I'm kind of pulling ahead. I've read all the Shades of Magic and the Near Witch, and now Vicious and Vengeful, and these ones are definitely my favorites so far. The Near Witch for me was kind of boring. I actually liked the little short story at the end better than the book itself. And Shades of Magic, I enjoyed. It was a really cool concept, like a lot of her books, but I just didn't really fully connect with the characters ever, I didn't feel like. But Vicious was immediately very gripping and stayed gripping throughout. And I actually really enjoyed the characters. They are all very gray characters, very morally questionable. The 2 main characters, if I met in real life, I would despise, but in a book, they were very interesting to read about. The premise of this one, since her premises are always so great, is that people with essentially superpowers exist, but how they get these superpowers is by having a near-death, or rather like an actual death experience. The prerequisite for getting superpowers is that your heart does have to stop and be restarted. So you have to die. And our 2 main characters are college students, and one of them decides to write his term paper or whatever about extraordinaries, which is what superheroes are called in this series. And him and his friend end up deciding to try to become extraordinaries by kind of killing themselves in controlled settings where the other one will be able to resuscitate them. So a super cool premise, and it all predictably goes very wrong for them, and it actually ends up becoming more of a revenge story than anything else. So I really enjoyed this one. Was my favorite V.E. Schwab book so far, by far. But that being said, I did go into Vengeful feeling very nervous. And the reason for that is because everyone that I hear talk about Vicious gives it the highest of praise. I feel like the Vicious Vengeful duology isn't as well known as, say, the Shades of Magic trilogy or Addie LaRue, but I do feel like nobody has anything bad to say about Vicious at all. Whereas Vengeful, all the reviews I have ever heard about it are, I loved the first one and this was the most disappointing sequel I have ever read in my life and I hate it. So I went into it thinking, wow, am I gonna hate this? Because Vicious, again, super fun, 4 stars, really enjoyed. It was just, the story was so tight and well done, and the characters were so engaging, and it was very good. But I am happy to report that for me, I liked Vengeful better. Seems to be a really unpopular opinion, I think. I can see why people would maybe not like it as much. A lot of new characters are introduced, there's a lot going on. It's definitely not as contained as the first one. And if you don't like the new characters, obviously you would not like the book as much. But I found the new characters interesting. Going into it, I was a little bit worried because this one definitely could stand on its own. Everything wraps up very well. Like I said, very well contained story. So I was like, oh, well, maybe she just shouldn't have written a sequel because there was nothing to do with it. But she does find a very good reason for a sequel to exist at the very beginning of the book. Going into spoiler zone now for the first book and the sequel. But at the end of the first book, one of our main characters is killed, and he's an extraordinary, so he's already died once. But one of our other main characters has the ability to bring the dead back to life. But she has found that when she brings extraordinaries back to life, their powers end up getting messed up. So at the beginning of this book, we found out that our main character who was brought back to life, his power is messed up and it's actually killing him. He has powers that have to do with like electricity, and so like the power that he has, it kills him, but then it brings him back. But he's dying more and more frequently and for longer and longer amounts of time. So the big thing for our main character in this book is that he has to figure out how to fix his power so it doesn't eventually actually kill him for good. So this was a premise that totally made sense based on what we knew about the situation in the first book to garner a sequel. So I appreciated that right out the gate, since it was something I was worried about. And then yeah, like I said, we got some interesting new characters. Two of the big ones are both new extraordinaries, and I found their powers interesting. One character I definitely preferred more, the character who can become anyone else. Her power was fascinating. The other character I didn't love because she was like a stereotypical mob boss wife character, which is just not my favorite stock character out there, but she was worth putting up with to have the other new character. One character from the first book that I liked less was Sydney. She was just such an angsty teenager in this book. It got old fast. But overall, another thing that I liked about this book that I really appreciated was we got a little more fleshing out of some of our main characters from the first book. We don't necessarily get a lot of backstory for any of the characters in this book because, again, the book is so tight, which is a good thing. But it was nice to learn more about our characters' histories, most especially Eli, who is kind of our big antagonist for the two books. And I really liked the kind of trope of him being put into kind of a Hannibal Lecter kind of a position where he's now imprisoned and he's helping law enforcement track down other extraordinaries. And learning more about the extent of his abilities with his power was also interesting because it's a lot. So yeah, overall, this one just had so much more going on that made it feel so much more interesting. This one was not boring by any means, but I mean, always give me more, right? So I gave this one 5 stars. I really enjoyed this one. Was hooked the whole way through. And so that was it for the Vicious and Vengeful experience, other than this one, unlike this one, very much demands a sequel, and it's been a while. I don't know if we're actually getting a sequel or not. There is a sequel on Goodreads that is as yet not published, but like I said, it's been a long time since this one came out, so I'm kind of worried about the third book and whether or not it's going to happen. I know she has come out with some graphic novels that take place in this universe since this one, but I don't read graphic novels. So then after Vicious and Vengeful, next year I'll be reading Addie LaRue. I read The One Memory of Flora Banks by Emily Barr. And this was a reread. This one is about a girl who, due to something that happened when she was 10 years old, cannot create new memories. She only remembers her life from before the age of 10 and a few hours at a time before her memory resets. And at the beginning of the book, she kisses a boy and she remembers it. And so she immediately convinces herself that she's in love with this boy and that if she stays with this boy, she will keep remembering everything that happens with him, and therefore her memory will work again. But unfortunately, this boy is going off to the Arctic to do research in the Arctic. And so he leaves the next day after they kiss. And also this boy just so happens to have just broken up with her best friend, so her best friend now hates her. So that's kind of the basic setup of the book. This is one that I didn't remember super well, but I did remember liking the first half better than the second half and kind of really not liking the ending. And that did kind of hold true. I think what first catches your attention with this book is the writing style. It's very specific because this character can't remember things for more than a few hours, which for me was super interesting, but definitely could be annoying because it is repetitive. She's constantly having to remember what she already knows. But honestly, that's my favorite part of the book, is how specifically she thinks because of what she's dealing with. So yeah, if you're looking for like a unique writing style, this is a good one. There were lots of things that kind of bothered me about it. I really didn't like that the friend gets mad at her for kissing her boyfriend because anyone could see that the boyfriend is just taking advantage of her. And then yeah, the ending, it kind of slowed down a little bit in the second half. And then the end was just a little bit too messy for me. It was kind of too back and forth on, well, was the boy lying to her the whole time or was he not lying to her the whole time? And some of the stuff that happens with Flora kind of undercuts the entire point of the book, which the entire point of the book is that her parents are being too protective and need to let her still live her life despite her memory issues. And there are just some things that she does that kind of undercut that message a little bit. But yeah, still an enjoyable one. I wasn't sure if I would unhaul it after reading it since I didn't have very clear memories of the book. But I did decide to hold on to it because again, I did really enjoy the writing style. But still, as my young adult contemporary book shelves start to fill up, this one is going to be kind of high on the potential chopping block. So we'll see. I may unhaul it still someday. And then finally in April, I read 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher, which obviously this one's kind of a controversial one. I also rewatched, so I was not planning to rewatch the show, but after like my first day of reading, I was like, well, I'll just watch the first episode again. And then my husband actually just happened to catch like the last 15 minutes of it, and we ended up binging the entire first season. I just finished the book today, and we have 3 episodes left in the first season, which I think we'll be watching tonight. Some people say this book is kind of trauma porn. I fall more into the camp of it can get conversations going. I had never read the book before, but I had watched the entire series, all 4 seasons, all the trash. So it was interesting to see the differences. Some of the tapes got moved around. The concept of this one, if you don't know, it's a pretty well-known book, but the concept is a girl has committed suicide and she has left behind these cassette tapes explaining 13 reasons why she did it, and all the reasons are a different person essentially and something that that person did. So the series moves around some of the tapes. The first season follows the book. From there they just go wherever they want. Overall, I kind of liked the show better. I don't think that's a super popular opinion. I think some people feel like the show tried to sensationalize it more, but I don't know. In some places it for sure did that, but in other places I feel like the character motivations made a little more sense with the stakes being a little bit higher. But yeah, obviously this is like a premise that's gonna catch your attention immediately. You're gonna want to know the 13 reasons. And even already knowing them, because I had watched the show, I still just wanted to read Hannah telling her story. Our other main character is the person who is listening to the tapes, one of the people who receives the tapes. And I wish that he either would have interrupted the tapes less or would have interrupted for longer stretches of time. We would get like 2 sentences from Hannah, 2 sentences of what Clay thought about what he just heard. And it was just a little bit too much back and forth for me personally. So yeah, it's a very compelling read, a very compelling story. I enjoyed the show when I watched it, all 4 seasons, and I enjoyed the book. One thing I've got to say for the show, even if it is a little bit Riverdale-y and a little bit sensationalized, it does pretty much, if memory serves, without fail, give a really good example how to react to people who are telling you about their trauma. Like, the characters who are hearing this from the traumatized people always just are super supportive, super aware of like physical boundaries and all that. So if the show did anything, I think it did a pretty good job of setting an example of how to react to that kind of thing. So yeah, those were the 4 books I read in April. Give me all the V.E. Schwab and 13 Reasons Why discourse down below. I hope you enjoyed watching. Remember, words matter.